Okay guys, we're going to be going back to Mesoamerica and we're going to look at what impact does colonization have on the New World. So we know that explorers have gone out, such as Columbus, and they were on the way to get to India and to the Asian markets, but instead of winding up in India and the Asian markets by sailing west, we see that they discovered a new landmass in the Western Hemisphere. And this is what's going to encourage explorers to go back to their empire without riches. And this will lead to the empires encouraging conquerors to come in to find mineral and other resources. So Hernan Cortez will conquer the Aztecs, and we know that he's aided a lot by Indian groups that are upset about having to pay tribute to the Aztecs. Another thing he's aided by, we have talked about the Mayan creation myth, that they believe a god named Quetzalcoatl was going to come back, and many people believe that Hernan Cortez is Quetzalcoatl and he's allowed back into the Aztec Empire and he's able to conquer them. We know with their military weapons that he's able to basically subdue the Aztecs. Francisco Pizarro comes into the Inca Empire, and he actually comes amidst a civil war, and he's able to conquer the people because of this feud between the brothers about who's going to be the real king. Cabeza de Vaca will conquer Florida. And so this is just going through the cycle of exploration. We see the explorers come out, they discover the Americas. This will lead to the conquistadors coming in and conquering the areas. We know that Hernan Cortez conquers the Aztecs, which is over here in New Spain, in this area. And then Pizarro comes down into Peru and conquers there. We will see that missionaries will be sent. Missionaries, the whole purpose, we know that they're there to learn more about the natives and also to convert the natives, but this goes back to the trifold purpose of exploration: God, glory, and gold. We see eventually, because of the looking for the resources, permanent settlements will be created. A lot of them will find silver, which was their main purpose, finding gold, but silver is found. But permanent settlement happens because the plantation style economy will dominate the Americas, and eventually they will become official colonies of Spain. Because of this, we're going to see a class system get created. The Peninsulares are at the top of the class system. That means they were born in Europe and they've come to the Americas, and they're usually government or bureaucratic officials. The Creoles are people born in the Americas but had 2 European parents. So they're truly European, but they were just born in the Americas, so they're second class. The mestizos is because of the lack of women coming over who were peninsulares. Many of our Europeans will take up relations with the indigenous, and this will lead to a mixed group of people called the mestizos, which is a European parent and an indigenous parent, or the mulattoes, which is an European parent with an African parent. Mulattoes is also there with Portuguese and African parent. And the last group is the Zambos, which is a native parent with an African parent. And this is what's going to lead to this social structure. We see the Peninsulares get the best jobs. They were born in the peninsula. They're high up. The Creoles are second class. Eventually, the Creoles, because they're often overlooked for jobs, will revolt against the Peninsulares, and this will lead to the revolutions, which we'll talk about in the 1700s. And then it's the mestizos and the mulattoes, this mixed population, because of the lack of men. European men will take up relations with the indigenous and Africans. And our last group, the Zambos. So originally, when the Peninsulares came over, they looked at the indigenous people as a source of labor. And the encomienda system will be created, where we are enslaving the native laborers, but in promising them that they will be taken care of in health and welfare, and they will be Catholicized. We will see that their health and welfare won't be taken that much care of, but because of epidemic disease, the encomienda system fails. We see all of these new, which we saw in the Columbian Exchange, all of these new diseases being introduced to the native populations. They really have no immunities against it. And so our native population, the indigenous people, will die off in mass casualties, which leads the Europeans looking for another labor source, which will lead to the slaves being introduced into the Americas. We see Spain and Portugal begin to fight over the territory in the New World because they see its land resources. It's very mineral rich. And so this will lead to the intervention of the Pope, and the Pope will introduce this idea that we are going to divide up the world in the Treaty of Tordesillas. What happens in the Treaty of Tordesillas is the Pope basically divides up the world at the 370 leagues right here, this little yellow line, saying that everything to the east, everything to the east of that line, Portugal gets to obtain. If it has not been Christianized, Portugal can go into those lands and Christianize the people. Everything west of 370 leagues, this yellow line, will then go to the Spanish. And the Spanish can, if it hasn't been Christianized, they could obtain the land and Christianize the people. Okay, other people who go out into colonization, we see the French are going to go out and they come into North America, and they're in the Mississippi River Valley in Upper Canada. They establish Quebec as their capital, and they start relations with the indigenous, and they're going to start trading furs. The English, however, come settle along the Atlantic seaboard. They establish their 2 colonies. We know Jamestown is done by the Virginia Company. They're looking for gold. Y'all probably all know the tale of John Smith and his people not being able to find gold. Eventually, they don't find gold in this area, and they will go into making crops of tobacco. Massachusetts Bay Colony is eventually the Protestants, Puritans coming over, upset with the church. And our last one is the Dutch. The Dutch under Henry Hudson are looking for the Northwest Passage. They do not find it. Eventually the Dutch are overtaken by the Duke of York, who will reestablish British control along the Atlantic seaboard. So one of the reasons why the Spanish were very interested in the Americas was because of the vast mineral wealth. We see in Zacatecas, they find silver mines, and in Peru, in the Inca Empire, has a lot of silver. And so silver is a function of economic trade. To trade with China, to trade with India, you must have this. That's why they were going to West Africa to get gold. But now silver is really going to filter into the Spanish Empire, which will stimulate their global trade and make it one of the richest empires at this time. And so we're going to see another system of labor is created called the hacienda system, where it basically gives prominent land, the best land, to peninsulares, and they will produce either wheat, grapes, meat, pig, other craft stuff. And we're going to see the reprimendo system is created, that the native communities have to provide labor to these haciendas, the mines, the farms, and only work a limited time period, and they would be paid. We're going to see the hacienda will remain, and the reprimendo system will eventually fail, and we're going to see native laborers replaced with slave labor. So in the French area, the native people will exchange animal pelts, such as beavers, for manufactured goods. And we're going to see our French people, they're just going to settle in the area for merchants to trade. And we're going to see that the European market, there's an incredible demand for this. And so we will eventually see the extermination of the beaver in the French area. Eventually, there's going to be conflicts of who really controls this land and who has the hunting grounds, and this will lead to a war eventually, which we'll talk about, the 7 Years' War, or the French and Indian War. Native people will be displaced by Europeans. Many of them are looking at their lands to turn them into plantations, and in the Western society, tobacco will be one of the main crops in the English colonies. Rice will be one of the main crops in South Carolina. Indigo and cotton are going to be eventually not till like 1800 after the invention of the cotton gin. But we see because of our indigenous population declining, that the need for slave labor occurs. And this is what's going to lead to that second leg of the Columbian exchange, of the slaves coming over. And they do have knowledge on rice and how to cultivate sugar and indigo, which makes them very valuable. Okay, so our missionaries are going to be very important, and we know that there's a threefold purpose of exploration. We know it's God, to spread religion; glory, to bring prestige to your empire; and gold. And so our missionaries are going to be very important in spreading Christianity to our native population. They learn about the native population. They learn their language. And we see that this will lead to some Native Americans adopting the Catholicism. But they're going to bring with it, it's their indigenous culture. And we see that one of the things that is going to be brought in is the Lady of Guadalupe, and also missionary society, which will lead to the missions creation to get to native populations. Okay, we're done.